everyone. Welcome back. I'm so honored to finally get Colette on to the podcast after meeting her, like a year and a half ago or so? I don't know. Seems like eons ago. Hi, Colette.
Met at Mabs finally.
I know, right?
Yeah.
Thanks for being here.
I'm so excited to be here. Thanks for having me, Beth.
It's going to be fun. So Colette Condorcita is an activist, psychedelic coach, facilitator, consultant, and regenerative developer. She has been working with and studying psychedelic technologies for nearly 25 years. Raised by social justice activists in the Quaker community in Philadelphia, Colette has supported individuals in collective healing and justice movements her entire life. At age 14, she had a life-changing spinal cord injury during an athletic competition, preceded by a prophetic dream. She was completely paralyzed from the neck down with a 2% chance of recovery. Utilizing self-directed neuroplasticity to heal, she developed what she identifies as a shamanic neurotype, a form of neurodivergence that is similar to what many utilize psychedelic experiences to achieve, and walked out of the hospital. Colette received her BA in International Development and Relations and, horrified by the U.S. international development model, came to work in regenerative agriculture and social justice initiatives in the Global South with indigenous communities, and has nearly 15 years of study and collaboration with entheogenic traditions in the Americas. Colette is passionate about the integration of the neurodivergent versus the pathology paradigm of mental health, and advocates for creating balanced frameworks for her clients and the larger psychedelic movement. Colette, wow. I did not know. I love hearing these. I mean, I know it's probably horrifying to have a spinal cord injury, especially, by the way, during a competition. But I actually love hearing these stories. I was literally just talking to a friend who's staying with me right now earlier today about someone else I know who had, a pretty bad brain trauma injury, and then how so many gifts open up from that. And we've seen this with, the Joe Dispenzas of the world and other leaders like this. But I would love to hear your story and also the dream that happened with it.
Yeah, I think, well, it's so great to be here, Beth. Thank you so much. Yeah, I think it's really interesting for those of us who are on a path of studying consciousness, studying how consciousness permeates throughout nature. It's like underneath all of it is like how we can sync up the unknowns and the knowns of how reality is working, right? And so I've met quite a few people in my life who, before big accidents that are life-changing, near-death experiences, et cetera, that they dream about it, they connect with it, they energetically sync up with it. And for me, with my injury, I dreamt about it pretty much exactly like it happened 2 weeks before. And so I was a wrestler in high school, and I grew up just kind of a lunatic athlete, and just doing all the sports, playing football, baseball, soccer, all the things. Was a competitive swimmer starting from 5 years old. And I just really liked to push the envelope physically and wanted to wrestle, got involved in Greco-Roman wrestling. And the day that I broke my neck was in a competition with another school. And I actually tried to give up my weight class that day. I was like on an unconscious level, tried to give up my weight class, and, through kind of, and I wound up competing actually, not even like in the meet, it was like post meet. One of my coaches was like, hey, competition, and you're still learning and training. I had only been in wrestling maybe a year at that point. And it's a complicated sport. People who don't really know it, it's like full on training physically and mentally. It's a phenomenal sport. But yeah, I broke my neck and was completely paralyzed on the mat. I had an out of body experience that was the same as my dream. And this is where we get into shamanic neurophenomenology. I presented at a conference a few months ago on this, and I have been quite a bit the last few years. But when we get into the cross-cultural phenomenon of shamanism, I don't identify as a shaman, but as having a shamanic neurotype. And what this means is that I am innately connected to the let's just say the transpersonal aspects of consciousness. And from that injury, I had really a 0% chance of recovery. I almost completely severed my spine. I was on a ventilator. I was in the hospital for 5 months. It was incredibly difficult for me and my entire family. Definitely still integrating that injury. It's been 25 years. And, but there was a lot of practical things that happened that I think were very karmic, very, God bless Western medicine, like thank you, Western medicine, and also a lot of psychospiritual work that was going on. And this is where we get into the self-directed neuroplasticity, of go into deep states of self-hypnosis, really unconscious learning that I was receiving from other places, lots of prayers going down through. So there's all these different things going on that resulted in a tremendous amount of recovery from that injury. So that's kind of a little bit of a portal into that.
My God. Wow. What a journey. So let me ask, I'm curious,
Yeah, girl.
your first entheogenic, well, that was very entheogenic, but first psychedelic experience with a drug or a plant medicine, was that after this or before this? And how did that have an effect on, your journey to where you are now?
Yeah, well, I think that a lot of us who work with psychedelics or are on a shamanic path, we develop what's called nature brain. And it's like we kind of get, it's like it turns on, like, this fascination with the natural world, and in all these different ways. I'm sure a lot of you can relate to that, but I broke my neck when I was 14. I was quite young. I turned 15 in the hospital like 2 weeks after it happened. But my first, entheogenic experience was with psychedelic fungi, and I was 17 years old. And I actually recently got interviewed by Bloomberg Magazine about this concept of like how entheogens can turn on nature brain. Hopefully, turns on nature brain for people. Hopefully,
That's my
I don't
prayer.
know how it doesn't. Apparently, it doesn't for everyone. But this concept of, I was in West Virginia on a field study trip at the community college I was studying at. And we had simultaneously in 2 days, like, went to the largest mountaintop removal site on the planet and seen the absolutely horrific impacts of that ecologically and also in the local community. And then simultaneously we're, meeting with like the corporate executives of the mine, and then also the community activists trying to shut it down. And the next day had, this amazing psychedelic fungi experience in an incredibly amazing ecological system called Dolly Sods in West Virginia. And it really just synced out so much for me of my, my deeper psychological, psychospiritual process, shamanic neurotype. And that was the first one. I just turned 40 in January. So it's been quite some time exploring these compounds and connecting in that way.
So tell us, what is it you're mostly up to these days? Like, what is your work, your sacred work centered around? Because you have your hands in so much. You've been doing activist work, decriminalization work, big work in the psychedelic space, and then other spaces as well. But yeah, like, where would you say your work focuses on right now, and where is it heading?
That's a good question. So I was just sharing with Beth before we got on the call. This has been a big year of transition for me. I ran a healing space, community garden, multi-unit building that I designed and built out here in Philadelphia for almost a decade. And I transitioned out of that space this past year. And also ran Decriminalize Nature Philadelphia for 4 years. I'm from Philly. And thank you, Bev. Yeah. Philly is the largest, most chronically impoverished city in the United States. And we're the center of the not even opioid, it's fentanyl and trank crisis. And, we have a couple thousand people living on the streets here, and it's been an intense transition here. So I ran that organization for 4 years, working to decriminalize entheogens. My work and my focus is in a lot of different pots. Right now, I'm really wanting to continue moving forward in how to expand the ability of, supporting my clients. I do have coaching clients that I work with who are really trying to fundamentally change phenomenon. They're usually working with entheogenic technologies, not, it's like when we're getting into healing, what exactly is healing, right? And I think that at the basis of it, a lot of it is changing perspective. It's changing the perspectives of our psychological, practical phenomenon in life. So I work with clients in that way through self-directed neuroplasticity. And then I also always have my hand in supporting different ecological movements, because for me, the biggest lesson for me on like a path of healing is like, how do we take personal healing and translate that to collective healing and healing with the relationship of humanity and nature. So I'm working on some different ecological regeneration projects in Costa Rica and in Colombia, and was just in 6 weeks in Australia, kind of connecting with community there. So, really working as a consultant and supporter of different regenerative design projects as well.
This is actually one of my favorite topics. I'm sure you know Rak Razam. I've interviewed him talking about this, and it's just
Mm,
so. It gives. This is where I start to get a little more hope for for this world, which I tend to be an optimist. By the way, I will state that I tend to just really like believe in the larger vision of collective healing and the healing of this planet. But it's very hard with the world that we're in today to just see everything and believe that everything's okay. But let's talk about the medicine work, the entheogenic technologies, and then this kind of ecological change work and activist work. Do you think? I mean, I don't know. This is it. Almost seems obvious, but do you think that there's a reason why the plant medicine is expanding across the planet, and there's more, desire for it and need for it, and here it is, like decriminalizing, legalizing, and spreading. At the same time, we're in this massive crisis. Like coming into potentially the sixth extinction. Do you think there's a connection, and where do you see that maybe there's hope for, the work with medicines and psychedelics to help, people or individuals or even just as a collective make a change? Like, where do you see this connected, or do you at all?
yeah, I mean, Beth, it's a tricky one. I think for so many years, I think I had this idea like ayahuasca is going to save humanity.
Yeah,
You know,
sometimes I really think that, and then sometimes I'm like, okay, there's 8 billion
yeah, me
people.
too.
8 billion people. We gotta get to everybody. Oh no.
Well, no, I think it's a challenge because it's like I can speak to how that technology in particular has worked on me. Of course, I was raised a certain kind of way. I was raised by social justice activists and in a certain way in Philadelphia and et cetera, let alone like 20 years working in the developing world, et cetera. So like this is the challenging thing that I've seen, especially I would say since 2020, since COVID started. And I feel like entheogenic and psychedelic technologies have gotten that much more, like in the mainstream since the beginning of COVID. Um, but it's like I think it's like everything, it's like everything. And I think some people take these technologies, start working with them, and they're like, wait, how can I make money off of them and exploit them? And there's nothing wrong with that. Like business is I have my hat in business too. That's important. But for me, it's more so like, wait, indigenous people around the world occupy 80% of the land that we radically need to protect for the security of the entire planet, for humanity's security, for all of the unbelievable compounds in nature that we don't even know about that we're just extinguishing, right? So it's like that's always where it's been working on for me, and I see it both sides. Like I think that the psychedelic movement needs more balance and integration with the psychospiritual spaces that these technologies open up, and I think that it's exciting for me that more people are talking about that. But for me, it comes back to like, you know, always underneath things, how can we be supporting Indigenous people more, getting more resources to them, helping them protect their land? I've spent quite a bit of time in the Amazon basin, and what's happening down there is really bad, really, really bad in so many ways, from how extractive industries are working, the impacts of the cocaine trade. Please don't use cocaine, everyone. It's not good.
Yeah. The
Coca
first
leaf, amazing,
Yeah.
sacred.
Yeah.
I mean, can we legalize
Real
coca leaf,
medicine. I
y'all?
know.
Can we please get that into the agenda? Nobody's really talking about that in the psychedelic movement, but
Because we all
you know,
just sneak it in. I'm like, it's kind of crazy that I'm sneaking in this amazing sacred plant that, as my friend puts it, my friend's like, it is a superfood. And I'm like, God, it's kind of sad that we have to hide this. Like it's
I
illegal
have to
drugs.
say, I was just hanging out with unbelievable, very successful, like billionaire successful entrepreneurs in Australia. And I was sitting around with them in like $100 million house on the Sydney Bay and sharing with them about coca leaf and sharing with them, hey, can you guys with your network, like, can we get the marketing campaign together to teach people about, I mean, as someone who has chronic arthritis,
Mhm.
I'm neurologically weak on my one side from my injury. I've had quite a few other injuries as a result of being continuous, like crazy athlete. Farming is really crazy athleticism. So, like, as you know, Beth, like you got
my mini farm. Like,
your mini farm, but it's full on, especially mini farms. You're using your body even more. You're not using like a tractor. So coca leaf,
so good.
Technology, unbelievable psycho-spiritual technology. The Mumbai cultures in particular for me are just unbelievably powerful. And honestly, that's my favorite plant medicine technology at this point in my life.
And it's crazy how it's been bastardized, just like tobacco. It's kind of the same, it's like this extractive technology that, I mean, I don't know the whole entire history of cocaine and the war and the, criminalization, and I could go on, but I agree. The first time I went to Peru, I mean, I just didn't know how bad it was. And it's like we were in the middle of the jungle, and it's like they're clear cutting to then plant coca plants for the cocaine trade.
Yeah.
And it's all land grabs too. I mean, the whole thing is just so dark. And I'm like, oh my God, it's like everywhere, and now it's like, there's just, I mean, I could go on and on. It's like, there's so much more to it, and I'm like, this is a beautiful sacred plant. And you're right. Like, stop doing it, people. It's super simple.
I've been building a relationship I actually have a meeting with the head of the park later, but for those of y'all who are interested in ethnobotany and everything that we're speaking to, if you look at a map of Colombia, in Southwest Colombia and the Putumayo Basin is the largest per capita of psychedelic plants and fungi that come from that region. And that's where the Yahe cultures come from, the traditional Yahe cultures. And in that area, there's a park called Orito Inguiandi, Plantas Medicinales. It's a huge national park system that encompasses every climate type in Colombia. And I've been building a relationship with this park for some years. They cultivate 200 different species of medicinal plants in a massive agroforestry system with the Cofan culture that's there. And they're right on the border with Ecuador. And so what's going on there? You go there, you see the impacts of the petroleum extractivism. You see the impacts there of the narco trafficking. Even though coca leaf is an amazing sacred plant for the Cofan, they intentionally do not cultivate it in the park because of actual literally the narco traffickers will force communities to grow coca leaf over their crops. They will, it's full on gangster shit. And of course, a lot of people are chronically impoverished, so they get involved with this because it's literally, even though they're not getting paid hardly anything to produce coca leaf, if they are even getting paid and they're not getting forced to grow, so the park intentionally doesn't grow coca leaf. And so I have a meeting with them later on about how to support them with their soil regeneration there in areas that have been really chronically impacted from not only the monocultures of coca leaf, but from the really dirty extractive chemicals that are used and dumped into nature to be able to do that first paste of making cocaine. And so, we talk about cocaine. Cocaine is one alkaloid in the plant structure that is synthesized and extracted and then, of course, sold. But this is something that for me really needs to be, when we're talking about protecting nature, indigenous people, coming in right relationship, advocating for change, advocating for better, safer compounds for people that we're using for substances, coca leaf needs to be addressed, and it hasn't been by the psychedelic community in the way that I think is important.
Please let me know when you're ready to create this whole campaign. I mean, I know a lot of people would be into that because it is true. It's all interconnected. We can't just be pushing, mushroom legalization for $3,000 psychedelic therapy without thinking about the whole entire ecosystem, because it's all interconnected. And a lot of people, I mean, I'm sure you know about this. It's like when I interviewed my friend who's a restoration ecologist, and she's like, look, like you go into the jungle, if you chop down an ayahuasca vine, that affects so much more than just that ayahuasca vine. It's like, it's wrapped around a tree that birds land on. And then, it's like if it takes down the canopy or it interrupts the canopy, then it changes migration. And then it changes, the seeds that the monkeys eat. I mean, it's like on and on. And it's so interconnected. And I'm like, wow, no one's talking about this. Everyone's just talking about the medicine or, I mean, and it's like, this is where it feels like there's so many of these big problems, and there's just like the root problems to all of them. And it's like, even this training I was in over the weekend, it's like we kept talking about this, and Charles Eisenstein talks about it, and a lot of great leaders with good voices, like everybody's talking about like, we're attacking these like surface problems or talking about a lot of surface problems, but we have to get to the roots, like the root of the problems in the first place. And it's like, you mentioned like a specific place, it's not just like get rid of the cocaine on the street. It's like, wait, there's this whole like ecosystem around it. And, and changing the conversations. And this is where I wonder, like, do you as an activist who's been on this path your whole life, like, do you keep hope? Like, do you have hope? Do you believe that, like, maybe with the consciousness changing and with more awareness and maybe with voices of indigenous leaders and communities, like, do you believe that there can be like just a collective consciousness change that then kind of gets to these big root problems that maybe then shifts everything on the planet? Or is that just my dream?
Well, no, I think it's simultaneously carrying that on one hand, and then carrying the nature of the complexities of the Homo sapien existence on the other hand. And lately I've been, it's funny because like I think Spotify, it's funny how like the quantum tendrils of the interwebs are working with us and in these different ways. But I know so many people who've had the book Sapiens kind of like advertised at them through Spotify. And for years, I had so many friends like be like, yo, you got to read this because like you're like, if anyone's gonna get this, it's gonna be you. And I've been listening to it the last many weeks, and it speaks to, I was like, and I was sharing with Beth before we got on, like my ancestry is Arab and Palestinian, and I grew up immersed in Jewish culture. My sister converted to Judaism. Many good friends of mine are Jewish, and like my undergrad focused on North African and Middle East politics, and like all is like my brain is in it. I have a very I understand intimately that microcosm of the quote unquote holy land, right? And it's like a paradox of the complexities of the Homo sapien experience. And I think that when we get into what actual collective healing is, we got to dismantle a lot of the phenomenon we have around power dynamics, around practical unconscious power dynamics, around capitalism. I don't know that we're going to do that. Maybe.
Money, control, power, ego, power dynamics, separation, division, religion. I mean, even that, it's like, oh my God. It's
Totally.
Interesting.
And they come through in the psychedelic space too.
Yeah, no, I know. It's like, as below, so above.
Right.
I grew up with a non-practicing Jewish father, and I actually grew up Christian. And it's interesting. I grew up in a non-Jewish area. I had like literally no Jewish friends. I've actually only been to one bar mitzvah once, and that was when I was in my 20s, and it was like an ex-boyfriend's family friend. But it's interesting, even as a kid, when I first understood this concept of Israel and what was, like the land over there, I remember just inherently thinking like, that seems really incorrect. Like it didn't really make sense, and even my father, it was interesting some of the things he would say, because he didn't teach us a thing. He didn't talk about anything. He actually kind of just swore it off after his bar mitzvah, and that was that. I think for traumatic reasons, because he was like beaten in Hebrew school when he was a kid, because back then they would just beat you. Like it was like no big deal. But it's interesting to look at like, the world today and just the level of division and separation. And it's like, well, what is this really rooted in? And there's, of course, actually Alexander Beiner just posted about that, that study. I mean, I only know bits and pieces of it, but the one experience of giving Palestinians and Israelis ayahuasca and bringing them together for discussion, which I think, by the way, wasn't that just an isolated group? It's not like, let's give the whole two cultures ayahuasca and have them all get along together.
Well, quite practically, like it's very, I mean, if you were trying to do that over there, it's virtually impossible because there's an apartheid system there. And anyway, but I'm sorry, continue. Yeah.
No, but it makes me wonder. I'm like, what is this deeper answer? Like and do you think psychedelics might play a part in like this collective change, this collective liberation, this collective healing of what's happening on Earth? And this is something I explore constantly, where it's like, yeah, there is that feeling of, well, if everyone just took mushrooms, they would be more connected to nature, and then they would make better decisions, and then it would just domino effect. But I don't know, maybe that's just the illusion of the ego, like, like any other experience, but
I don't know either, Beth. And I think that for a bunch of and I think that there's part of me that's like the last few years I've been in a deep mourning process for a lot of different things. And right before COVID started, I had, let's just say, the biggest ceremony I've ever had in my life, drinking medicine in Colombia. And in that ceremony, I basically, I mean, the first and only time I ever completely lost control in a ceremony. And it was really amazing. And also, just basically, what happened was I felt the Amazon come into my body. And there was like hours of basically purging and chanting Icaros, and like, but basically it was like this feeling of nature showing me how she was going to start removing humans from Earth. And it was like this rage of nature being like, you don't respect me, you don't see me, you don't understand me, I'm going to start taking you out. And so it was like hours of, the Taitas praying over me and doing limpias and like purging and crying and like completely. And let's just say a lot of the things that I saw in that ceremony happened. I saw COVID happen. I saw the fires in the Amazon happen. I saw a lot of different like things that are going on right now. I saw what's happening in Israel and Palestine happening. So this is the thing. There's always like, I always have such deep reverence for nature and how there is a not so nice way that she's always checking and monitoring things, in ways that are so far beyond the conscious mind. And that's for me what I call God and nature. I'm actually starting an organization. I'm actually incorporating a church that's the Church of God and Nature. And that's coming and really holding the space for this, for, my prayer and my practice, and to support, the students who are part of my prayer and practice in that way. But this is like the thing where I would like to see humanity make it here. And at the same time, like nature has given us a really great opportunity to enjoy this unbelievable planet, to be healing on a karma. And I believe in karma. I believe in reincarnation and this type of thing on a multidimensional level. And I also believe in Western science. And with it's like, so it's like, how do we integrate this phenomenon? I think that like I heard this line a few weeks ago that if you speak any language, you come from a colonial entity. You know what I mean? So it's like when we're pointing the fingers of like who's a colonizer and this and that, the state of humanity, and this is where the book Sapiens kind of speaks to this. I just was visiting with Aboriginal elders who are part of the most intact Aboriginal community at Uluru, aka Ayers Rock in Australia. And when you go in to visit that culture, they really have very defined rules on what you can wear. Like I could not, this is from the Engano Nation in Colombia. Like I'm not allowed, you can't wear anything that's from another culture. They're very particular in how they share. They do not want you sharing about the culture outside of things. Like I was basically sworn to secrecy, involved in different, and it's like for me, like, wait, don't you guys like want to know about me and my culture and this and that? And they're like, no, we're trying to preserve our culture. And so like, this is the beautiful thing as someone who loves to travel and be immersed in other cultures and connect. But when a lot of people start doing that, that's when this sort of colonization thing can happen. It's a delicate thing. And yeah, this is the existential question of humanity, right? So I don't know, girl. I'm simultaneously coming back to finding the hope in humanity, and also like holding the space for we might not make it here. We might, and that's beautiful too. It's part of the nature's process.
Yeah. Yeah, I just did this amazing grief tending ritual a few weeks ago with this elder who, oh my God, it was like, honestly, that was some of the best medicine I've had probably in my life. I mean, that was life changing. And I just interviewed him last week, and it was like this deep grief work. Because I struggle and find it also beautiful. It's like this kind of the polarities of the deep grief for just even being incarnated here at this time and witnessing everything. And then also seeing it all as beautiful. Like, okay, there's this part of me that's like, okay, whatever's happening, it has to happen. Maybe it's the only way we're going to learn. Maybe it's like, we have to get pushed to the ultimate edge to finally like make the changes. And I'm like, God, how far does it go? Like the edge of extinction. I don't know if that's what it takes. Maybe that's what it takes. which is, there's such grief. And then there's also so much beauty. There is a lot of beauty every day. And there's a lot of people like you I get to talk to. That's like, oh, okay, there are people on the ground doing a lot of great work, and there's people that care. And I do always have this feeling of like, okay, if we just get more and more people to care and open our hearts and be more connected and realize that we're all interconnected, that there is no separation between us, the earth, the nature, the soil, each other, the religions, the skin color, it's like, then I believe like, okay, maybe there is hope in 7 generations. Like maybe I won't live to see it, and then, yeah, or maybe this is just what needs to happen. But
I've had this fantasy though, I've had this fantasy that like the billions, trillions of dollars that the global north, in particular, United States, puts into the military industrial complex, if we actually just reinvested that into the global south, if we reinvested that into humans here, the minimum wage in Pennsylvania, legal minimum wage is like $7.20 an hour or something. Oh, Australia, I was just in Australia, and they have a lot of really problematic things that are going on between Aboriginal, how, like the Aboriginal history there is like really wild. And that's a whole other podcast in general, with what's happened to that community. But, Australian culture really takes care of people in a way that I've not seen in the United States. Like minimum wage there's almost $30 Australian. Everyone's got healthcare. So it's like there's an ecosystem of like, literally, I swear to you, as soon as I landed there, I'm like, oh, my nervous system. And I came from Philadelphia airport, where, I mean, I've literally seen people injecting drugs in that airport before. Like literally, it's like everyone is in a trauma response.
It was like living in New York City. Yeah.
It's like, yeah. So it's like, like it's so much easier for people to take care of each other when they're being taken care of. There's a system of care there, to not fall into drug problems and not fall in violent crime when there's guns everywhere. There's no guns in Australia.
Yeah.
There was a massacre that happened there 20 years ago, and the entire community said, wait, we don't need guns here. Let's get rid of them. So it's like this type of, how our cultures moving forward with how we want to actually see the world around us. And that involves everybody's input, to do that.
Yeah, no, that's beautiful. I was just talking about it last week, how, I have an elderly mother in America. So interesting to see her level of like scarcity and, like feeling of like, I need to grip on everything because no one's taking care of her. Right. My ex-partner was European, and to witness his parents retiring at like a normal age and being like happy and safe and like knowing that they were fine no matter what was going to happen. Didn't matter how much money you made. Didn't matter what class you were in. You were just okay, and it's true. Like our most basic needs, like feeling safe, feeling calm, feeling cared for, knowing that we don't need to constantly be fighting and grabbing and, like killing people literally just to survive. And I know, and that's where I'm like, oh my God, the root of this culture here. It's like, I believe a lot of it's tied in. I mean, I think all of us realize this. It's like capitalism, money, survival, power dynamics, like the control mechanisms, the whole, people having to work at this level of work to just be so burnout and tired and just to be able to survive. It's like, yeah, of course, then there's abuse, or not caring about the environment, because that's like the lowest thing on their hierarchy of needs. It's like, I need to just survive. I don't care about throwing garbage out or the earth itself or soil, and it's just It's so interesting. So I don't know.
Countries too, and this is the other mechanism, like countries that have come to really take good care of their citizens, including Canada, Australia come to mind. Like, why are they able to do that? Well, they have, relatively speaking, a low population, and then they have a lot of natural wealth, quote unquote, natural wealth, natural resources that they're exploiting from nature through oil, through mining, through minerals, rare earth technologies. And that can be really, the mining industry in Australia is really problematic. And I've been talking to people about that too, with soil regeneration, what that looks like in a real deal way, with these systems that we're all tied up in, like we're all tied up in using oil. We're all, I'm talking to you on a computer. There's minerals in my computer that came from the Congo that were extracted under absolutely horrific slave conditions.
Yeah. Oh
like, how are we, and I think that this is when we come to a social justice lens that a lot of people don't have the bandwidth to be a part of. But again, it's like, how is our awareness of the systems actually pushing the button on the systems to try to be enacting for better change and support? And as someone who's been, connected to the Palestinian issue for my whole life, and I've not gone to any of the protests, and I've not, I've had to kind of separate from that. I've been involved in activism with all of that for most of my life. And I've heard that there's like problematic things happening at some of these protests. I'm super like, don't want to see any anti-Semitism or Jewish people become less safe than they already are. And also, it's the first time in my life anyone's given a shit about Palestinians, and that people are actually like, and I don't know if people saw this, but yesterday the International Criminal Court put out a warrant for the leaders of Hamas and also Netanyahu. It's like, they're like everyone's involved in that.
Exactly.
Like, how are we actually like holding accountability? And these are the deeper questions. And to me, that's like the existential part of like, when we've been working with entheogenic psychedelic technologies for a while, these are inevitably the questions that start to come up, is how to reorient these spaces. So, yeah.
Speaking about the psychedelic space, or spaces in general, I want to hear, because I'm curious. You've been in this world for a while, and probably have some interesting viewpoints. What are your views on this whole like psychedelic industry? I hate using that word, but someone said it a few years ago. We can't pretend that it's not an industry now. It is.
Yeah.
But because I have such mixed feelings about it all the time, like everything, right? Do you believe it's going in the right direction? And what do you want to see done differently, or at least held in a way that's really in high integrity versus maybe other directions where it's going? Like, what do you see from your perspective in this kind of psychedelic space?
Oh, I mean, I think it's like my emotions around it, Beth, change depending on the day of the week. It feels like.
What articles you read and who you talk to.
I think it's the challenge of how do we hold space for keeping people safe, keeping people balanced, keeping people supported. It's this larger question of everything. I think that it is an industry now, and even just a few years ago, I wouldn't have used that terminology. But we are fully in a psychedelic industry. There's pros and cons to what happens with market systems. And that's in and of itself, like when we talk about capitalism, like capitalism is not perfect, but what happened when capitalism infiltrated humanity was that it was a way to exchange goods and services across cultures and across space and across and so this is now infiltrated into the movement. And this is the balance of like, how do we hold space for research and a medical model and insurance and et cetera, to how do we hold space for religious freedoms, practice, individual cultivation, indigenous justice. It's so many different frameworks that have to be looked at the same time. And I think that what's inherently problematic from a startup ecosystem, and I work with a couple of different startups, including my beloved friends at Tandava Retreats in Mexico. We have the 5MBO platform for education, safety, and harm reduction that Joelle and Victoria have spearheaded in the 5MEO space, and have so much respect for them. Been amazing to collaborate with them. Dr. Bianca Seven, who I was just with in Australia, her work, please check it out. But it's like, it's like all of us are simultaneously trying to make our way, make enough money, do our work. And also like the people who I really love in this space, including you, are like, it's like, how are we having the conversations of the problematic, dangerous, challenging things going on here? And underneath all of that, especially in a startup ecosystem, when people are getting money from investors and have to show that, oh, these things are actually healing PTSD, and like, wait, we got all this money behind it, and like, trying to engineer results in certain ways. There's so much unknown in psychedelics. And as someone who's worked with them for 25 years with, pretty much thousands of clients over the course of my life in different contexts, that is the inherent wisdom of them. It is unknown. how they're working. So it's like we're having this conversation. What do you think about it? Girl, I don't know. Like there's ways that I'm studying this, but on an individual to a collective level, this is, I think, the challenge. And I think people who are really been in the space a long time, I think most of us will kind of answer similarly. And I think it's a challenge in a startup ecosystem with these technologies because they are so hyper unknown. Yeah. And how do we hold space for all of those other things where it's like they should be free, people should be able to cultivate them. It's, as someone who is nature brand and is an ethnobotanist, I can walk down the street and then, including Australia, I'm like, oh, that's a psychedelic plant. That's a psychedelic plant. That's a psychedelic plant. That, it's like around here in Philly, in my house, there's psychedelic plants on my street in Mount Airy here. It's like they're pervasive in nature. So do we like synthesize them and control them? And I think underneath all of it is like Indigenous reciprocity, getting money to Indigenous people to protect land and their culture. Indigenous people inherently protect land better than everyone else. They don't get it perfect all the time, but they do it way better than everyone else. It's been proven. And we need to radically protect nature. And the way that they're holding space for the transpersonal is incredibly important for the collective humanity that we exist in. So that's basically all I can say in a nutshell.
So good. So beautiful. Now, as someone who worked in decriminalization, which thank you, by the way, how do you feel about legalization versus decriminalization? Are you for legalization and what's happened out in Oregon and Colorado? And I don't know I can't even keep up with it, to be honest. I was following a lot of it and it's like, I keep hearing more and more things. I'm like, when did that happen? It's complicated, but yeah. What are your feelings on like this regulated legalization versus decriminalization?
I think that I'm a big fan of decriminalization. Legal is, let's just say decriminalization also too, with a lot of harm reduction that's embedded into things, because we do not have cultural containers in the United States. I take that back. We do have psychedelic cultural containers. I was for sure raised in like big Grateful Dead community, and like, we have our own flavor of psychedelic culture in the United States. But I think that there's, again, is like the integration of keeping people with balanced perspectives, because we get in when we talk about neurodivergent phenomenon too. Nick Walker, who I love, his book, people who are interested in like neurodivergence or neuroqueerness, something like 75% of people who are queer and identify as queer are neurodivergent. And when you start taking psychedelics, it kind of exacerbates neurodivergent phenomenon. So like, how are we keeping people kind of grounded in this time-space continuum with all the complexities of problems we have, with using a scientific method, which I think is not always perfect, but it's the best thing we have to kind of frame things in a lot of ways, and also the transpersonal. And so like suddenly like states are legalizing psychedelics, you can go in and buy whatever. Who is that person that's buying it? Who is that, we're decriminalizing these things. Who is that person that's growing it and selling it or sharing it? Or again, it's like, I think we need to have all of the things just to be able to keep checks and balances. And also I don't know this, quite honestly, what is the state of Colorado and Oregon doing on a level of harm reduction, safety, support, community support that's accessible for people? It's got to be both of those things. And because the state of community care at this point in the United States is so fractured, it's that's concerning to me a little bit. But the decriminalization work here in Philly, because we have so many people working in the psychedelic underground for, we have Black folk doing that. How do we keep people safe and out of jail? How do we keep people safe who are using these technologies to get off drugs? Which is a massive phenomenon that's happening here. I can't even tell you how many people I know or am connected to that have overdosed and died. So there's some deeper things that we got to organize, and it's all of it at once. It's like all of it at once to consider.
Whew. Yeah. And there's just so many layers and nuances to this whole movement, and the one thing you were speaking about, it's like, neurodivergent, the transpersonal, unknown. And it's like, I think what people don't realize, the people that are like, okay, let's take these psychedelics and turn this into a multi-million-dollar, whatever. new pharmaceutical, it's like every human's different too. Everybody has different traumas, different patternings, different energetic body types. We could go on and on. It's just like
Mm.
there's so many layers and nuances that I don't think there is like this one blanket answer for all, except I personally believe in decriminalization. Like that's where I really think it'd be great. Like that's my dream to see it just decriminalized everywhere, at least,
Yeah,
one day. I'm more of a fan of that than the legalization. But we'll see. Again, it's like everything. Maybe the legalization will eventually get to the place of, the supply and demand evening out, and maybe the cost comes down once it's at kind of like a mass availability. I don't know, but right now it's still very inaccessible for a lot of people because of
totally.
just the market. But
I think the challenge is that there's such a tremendous psychedelic underground that's happening. I mean, the level of psilocybin production in general that is and I'm like an OG, like, I've been going to mycology gatherings for 15 years and on the Northeast. I'm sure we probably know. I don't know if you know about the New Moon Mycology Summit. My friends who do that, people part of the radical mycology movements. You should definitely know about those people, Beth. They live up your way.
oh, I
But
probably know who they are. Yeah.
just amazing, magical, like, would do these conferences. They've started doing it again. My girlfriend Olga, who spearheaded it, but like no one turned away for lack of funds, like etc. But like these amazing mycology gatherings, like talking about like soil regeneration, psychedelics, food, medicine, like mycology is everything. But like coming from that social justice accessibility, like you don't need a lot of money to grow a lot of psilocybin
Yeah.
on your own. That could supply you for like years, even if you use a lot. Like you could do one grow and be good. So like, how do they control that? Like they're not. So how do we keep people like, it's like holding the space for things. Like on my street here in Philly a few years ago, and like I love cannabis. I was involved in growing cannabis for some years, many years ago. I have a neighbor here in Philly, a very humid, moist place in the summertime. He grew a tremendous plant. He gifted me almost a pound. They kind of grew this plant by accident. It's a whole other story. But I was like, damn, you grew this monster plant. Like, it's not always going to work like that. But like, I'm not allowed to grow a single plant in Philly legally. You know, it's like all these years, a medical model, get the license, you go, it's like you're going into a prison. Like, check the, like, it's like, to buy your weed, they can't even show you the cannabis you're buying. It's like all packaged and like,
Oh my God.
can't I just grow a few plants on my own?
I know. Simple. It's very simple, right? I know.
Very
Actually, I just
simple.
recorded an episode called where I talked about this notion of psychedelic sovereignty. Because I have a couple clients working in this realm too, where it's like, how do we empower people to just, if there's kind of this barrier that they see as like, oh, I can't afford it because it's $3,000 if I do it legally. It's like, well, here's how to do it on your own. Here's how to help one another. Here's how to create community. Here's how to grow it yourself. I always make jokes. I went to grow in 2017, bought all the things, got all the equipment. I never ended up growing, and I've just never bothered because I'm like, I would have enough to last me like 20 years. Like, and it's already like I have so many friends that have it around. I'm constantly being gifted it anyways. And I'm like, well, I don't really need to, but it's true. It's like, on some level, I do believe like these are plants that are accessible to all, and then they should be, and we should feel safe to take our healing and our own, cognitive freedom into our hands, which I believe is like the answer is through decriminalization. So I'm also curious. There's more and more people trying to get involved in the decriminalized movement, including some people I know in like very small towns and places that no one would ever think about.
Yeah.
What do you say to people that want to just start maybe organizing on their own or getting involved in their own communities to try to make change? Like, is this possible? Is it risky? Does it get you on the radar, which is always my fear. I'm like, I don't want people knowing what I'm up to. But like, did you have any kind of like, adverse experiences where you're like coming out and you're fighting for this, but now everybody kind of knows about you and knows what you're up to? Like, what advice would you have?
Well, girl, I think the cat's out of the bag.
Oh,
On
no. Yeah, exactly. Too late for that.
Yeah, I mean, without going into the stories, the cat's out of the bag for me. And this is why I'm incorporating a church at this point. And I've had challenges with the US government, and and it's been a balance of whether or not I want to like speak publicly about that. But yeah, I do. And as someone who has a lot of not only traditional training, connection, I've been at this for decades, in a very integrative way. There's got to be space for people like me in this, and this is really the challenge. And yeah, like I think that what's interesting about the whole sort of ecosystem right now, it's very unknown. And also I think that Larry Norris, who's been just holding down the entire decriminalization movement in California, he's like the point person for the entire national movement. And really, like there's not a lot of I busted ass for 4 years running an organization that I never got paid for, and never, it's like everything that we earned went right back into just keeping the web page on, and like the different promotional stuff and events we'd run. I think it's amazing way for communities to get to know each other and connect around an issue and be involved in the political system. United States, we have gone through crazy hell to create the system that we have here, that so far, God willing, I don't want to see Donald Trump win the election again. But like we have a process here where people can be involved in politics. Young people need to get it. Mostly young people are involved in the psychedelic movement. I would say under 45. I just turned 40, so I don't know, 45. I would say under 50, but mostly older people are involved in voting. Only 23% of the city of Philadelphia who were of voting age voted this past election. Why is that? And we're a majority Black city. I want to see Black folk go and vote. I have the ability and time to go vote, which is a whole other thing. But so many people feel so disenchanted about the state of things. But we have the ability to go lobby here. We have the ability to directly talk to our politicians here. This is such an important thing for people to do and have access to. And if they feel motivated to be supporting in having political change, that's how it happens. There's been so much tremendous grassroots political change. And that's what's been so inspiring for me about these protests that's been going on. This hasn't happened like this since the 60s in this country. And that was, gay rights activism, Black rights activism, women's rights activism. It happened from people hitting the streets, becoming engaged politically, getting organized. That's what created the change. If that shit didn't happen, we might still be living in the structures of those systems. And because people have not been involved on the progressive side of things, is why suddenly my rights to my body are being compromised again in this country. So please, if you're interested in decriminalization, know that I'm a resource for you. Larry Norris from Decrim Nature headquarters in California. Does it put you on the radar? Sure. But I think that for me, the cat's out of the bag on who I am and what I've been doing. And I've had to take that step in my life. And there's been challenges with that, believe me. But that's how I feel. And it's important for me to do that. And that is my life path.
So good. Yes. And I want to encourage people to, be a leader. Like I really believe we're living in the age of every human needs to be a leader right now. Like
100%.
There's no sitting back and like smoking a joint and hoping everything changes on its own. It's like,
well, we can sit back and smoke the joints, but then we can also organize.
Go do something. Yeah, exactly. Smoke a joint and then get out there. No.
With your homies and organize how you're going to change the system.
Yeah.
That's it.
Instead of binging on I don't know what people are binging on these days. I'm like, are people just binging on TikTok? I have no idea because I don't.
Bridgerton, new season.
That's what I've been. I'm like,
that's what I've been doing to turn my brain off the last few days.
I know. I'm like, don't tell me about a good series because I don't want to get sucked in. But unless it's actually really good, then I'll watch it. But Colette, let's talk about what's next for you. Where can people find you? What's coming up? Like, what is your vision for the next 6 to 12 months in your work?
So I'm building that right now. You guys can find me at Condor Medicine. I'm starting a new podcast that's going to be called Neurotype. So I'm getting ready to launch that in probably 2 months. So keep an eye on Condor Medicine. The idea of my podcast is to really speak to everything that we're speaking to, conversations around deep ecology, neurodivergence, psychedelics, I'm excited to be working on that. And yeah, I'm working on, connecting with Arito and Gandhi, as I spoke to, continuing with my clients. I run an agroforestry system in Costa Rica that I'm going to get back to in a few weeks. So go drop down my condor wings there. So yeah, stay tuned. But really the next year is looking like dropping deeper into supporting larger ecological restoration campaigns and continuing to support my clients through my coaching work and through my psychedelic facilitation work.
Amazing. Oh, I love it. Well, we'll have all your links, all your info right here in the show notes for everybody to access and follow you and stay updated with what's going on. And please, I want to hear more about this Costa Rica project. So, because that's my, I always say that's my like next big manifestation. I really love that country with my heart and soul. And I'm like, just
Me too.
guide me to where I belong there one of these days.
You got to come down for a visit when I'm there. Let's do it.
I will
Thank
definitely
you so
be
much,
there.
Beth.
Thank
This
you
was an
for
awesome
being
conversation
here.
all over
So
the
good to have
place.
you. No, very good. So inspirational. Thank you so much, Colette.
Thank you.